Health age of longevity strain versus FPG, visceral fat, and pulse pressure, number 1504, VPT Sharp 064, January 15, 2026. Gerald C. EclaireMD Foundation. Category, longevity. Preface, real age moves forward at a fixed pace, health age does not. Over time, I have seen people whose bodies age faster than the calendar, while others slow their aging even as the years pass. Medicine recognizes this difference, but it usually describes it with labels, rather than explaining why it happens. In this paper, I treat aging as a long-term physical process, shaped by daily stress on the body and how the body responds to that stress over time. Instead of asking how old I am, I ask how my body has changed relative to time. I focus on 3 measurable factors that I can control and track, and I examine how they shaped my aging path over 16 years. What follows is not theory for theory's sake. It is a personal, data-based account of how my body moved from faster aging to slower aging, when that shift happened, and why it lasted. How I define aging outcome. I define my aging outcome as the difference between my health age and my real age. If this number is positive, my body behaves older than my real age, which means accelerated aging. If this number is negative, my body behaves younger than my real age, which means slower aging and better longevity. Time itself cannot be changed, but how my body reacts to long-term stress can be changed. This definition allows me to isolate the part of aging that is still under my influence. The 3 factors I studied. I focused on 3 factors that repeatedly showed up as dominant in my long-term data. The first is fasting plasma glucose, measured in the early morning. This reflects long-term sugar exposure and ongoing low-level inflammation. The second is visceral fat percentage, which represents deep belly fat. This type of fat is not passive. It actively worsens inflammation and insulin resistance. The third is pulse pressure, which is the difference between systolic and diastolic blood pressure. This reflects how stiff and stressed the blood vessels are. These 3 factors represent different kinds of stress on the body. One is metabolic, one is inflammatory and hormonal, and one is mechanical. Data structure and time span. I used yearly data from 2010 through 2025. For each year, I recorded one aging outcome value, which is my health age minus my real age, along with normalized values of the 3 stress factors. Normalization allows me to compare their long-term impact fairly, even though they are measured in different units. This creates a clean, consistent picture of how my aging path evolved year by year. How I measure long-term impact. I do not look at single measurements in isolation. What matters is how stress acts on the body over time while aging is changing. When stress stays high while aging worsens or improves quickly, the long-term impact is large. When stress exists but aging changes slowly, the impact is smaller. By tracking how these factors interact with my aging outcome across years, I can see which ones quietly did the most long-term damage, and which mattered less for longevity. What the aging path shows. When I plot my data over time, 3 clear periods appear. From 2010 to 2014, my aging outcome was positive. My body was aging faster than time. Stress levels were high and unstable, and my condition was changing quickly. Around 2015, a major shift occurred. My aging outcome crossed from positive to negative. This was the most important period, because my body was changing direction under continued stress. This is when long-term outcomes are shaped. From 2016 onward, my aging outcome stayed negative. My body aged more slowly than time. Stress levels became more controlled, and changes happened gradually. This indicates stability. How much each factor contributed. When I calculate the long-term contribution of each factor to my aging path, the results are clear. Fasting glucose contributed about 40%. Visceral fat contributed about 33%. Pulse pressure contributed about 27%. This ranking reflects long-term aging deformation, not short-term danger. Why glucose dominated? Fasting glucose had the largest impact, because it represents constant, daily exposure. Even modest elevation, when sustained for years, creates cumulative damage through sugar binding, oxidative stress, and inflammation. This damage builds quietly. It does not announce itself with symptoms, but over time it shapes how fast the body ages. In my case, glucose control had the greatest influence on slowing my aging. Why visceral fat came next? Visceral fat is not just stored energy. It actively worsens inflammation and amplifies glucose damage. High visceral fat often accompanies obesity and insulin resistance, which then drive glucose higher. In my data, visceral fat acted both directly and indirectly. It added its own stress while also strengthening the effect of glucose. This is why it ranked second. Why pulse pressure ranked third? Pulse pressure reflects vessel stiffness and blood flow stress. It plays a major role in triggering sudden events, such as stroke or heart attack. However, for slow aging over decades, its cumulative impact is smaller than chronic inflammation, driven by glucose and visceral fat. Pulse pressure matters greatly for acute survival, but less for long-term aging erosion. How my health state changed over time. To understand whether my improvement was real or fragile, I looked at how my yearly health states connected over time. What I saw was not randomness. Each year flowed naturally into the next. Improvements built on previous improvements. There were no sudden jumps or reversals. Before 2014, my health pattern clustered in a higher stress, unstable zone dominated by high glucose. After 2014, my health pattern moved into a lower stress zone and stayed there. The years between 2014 and 2019 formed a clear transition period. During this time, my body moved away from its earlier, unhealthy mode and settled into a new, more stable one. Once that shift happened, it held. In plain language, before 2014 my body was in one unhealthy mode. After 2014, it entered a different, more stable mode and never went back. What this means for longevity. This matters because it shows that my improvement was not a temporary dip in numbers or a lucky stretch. It was a lasting change in how my body behaved under stress. Lower averages alone are not enough. Stability matters. Continuity matters. Direction matters. My data show that when chronic metabolic stress is reduced and kept under control, aging can slow in a durable way. The body does not just look better on paper, it actually follows a different path. Conclusion. By defining aging as the difference between health age and real age, and by tracking how 3 controllable stress factors shape that difference over 16 years, I was able to quantify what truly drives long-term aging. Chronic glucose exposure and inflammation dominate slow aging deformation. Visceral fat amplifies that process. Blood vessel stiffness remains critical for sudden events, but plays a smaller role in gradual aging. Most importantly, my improvement was not fragile. It was a real shift in trajectory that began around 2014, and remained stable afterward. Aging, in this view, is not an inevitable fate. It is a long-term process that can be measured, understood, and partially redirected through sustained control of the right factors. Disclaimer: I write this paper not for fame, but to share what I have learned so others can understand their health, prevent disease, and live longer, healthier lives. This content is provided for educational reference only, and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights for this article, and its related materials belong to the author, Gerald C.